This is what we've done here. We've collected 100 millions of documents. We collected, I don't know how many there are, 15 or 20 interesting documents.
Okay.
And we'll tell a story about the interesting documents. You want to look at this, I think.
Okay.
If you're already, if you're already filmed. Okay, so we'll start chronologically. This is one of the oldest documents that we have. It is one of almost 500 volumes. It's called the Nafus. Nafus is a Turkish word which is similar to nefesh in Hebrew. And from 1870, so shortly after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, until the eve of World War I, the Ottomans said, we actually want to know how many people are in our empire, and so we ought to count them. And they counted them. They counted them in those days by sending out these forms to the muhtars, the heads of villages or whatever, and or neighborhoods, and they said, fill out a form with everybody. Now it's interesting. The alphabet here is Arabic, but the language is Turkish, which means that if you know Arabic, you can read the names, but you can't read the vocations or all sorts of address things, that sort of thing. In order to be able to read this, you have to know Arabic and Turkish. There are such people around. The significance of this document, first of all, why do we have it? It's an Ottoman document. Why is it in the Israel State Archives? Because when the Turks were thrown out by the British took over the archives, and when the British left in 1948, they took with them some stuff, and other stuff they didn't take with them, so we have it. It's not our business as the Israel State Archive, but we inherit it, so we have it. I think that this is an important document because if somebody were to take the entire, 60,000 pages or something like that, the entire 60,000 pages, scan it. We've already scanned it. Nobody needs to scan it. We've already scanned it. And we'd type it all in. Then we would have a very precise answer about who was really here at the beginning of Zionism, 1880s, 1900. How many people really lived here? And who were they? How many were Arabs? How many were Christians? How many were Muslim? How many were Jews? How many of those hundreds of villages that we keep on getting told were destroyed by the Zionists were really there? Some of them definitely were. Some of them maybe not. Some of them might have been hamlets with 4 families and not 25,000 people. Who knows? This knows. Nobody's done that.
So this is a complete collection. You're saying this is?
It's the completest collection. I can't swear that it has everybody in it.
Right.
Again, if we were to do all of that data entry, and then you take people that you know of from other sources who were here alive at the time, and you don't find them here, then you know that it's not complete.
Sure.
But this is generally regarded as complete as anything anybody has, because the government wanted to know who everybody was.
Sure.
Okay. So that's this document. Second document, we have a German colony here in Jerusalem.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So the German colony also had its documentation. This is documentation from the German consul. There was a German consul up until World War II, actually, I think, or anyway, it was late 1930s. There was a German consul, and this is German documentation, which also the British inherited, and we inherited it from them. And it's all sorts of consular stuff, how do I get a passport, and I'm moving in funds for my business, that sort of stuff. But it's interesting, and for German, there are actually quite a number of German researchers who've come and looked at this stuff because it tells a story about that unusual story, set of German colonists. Okay. A souvenir to His Excellency Sir Herbert Samuel, High Commissioner, from June 1925, given to him by Rajab Nashashibi, who's the mayor of Jerusalem. Herbert Samuel was the first High Commissioner in mandatory Palestine, and in 1925 it was time for him to go back to London. And so Nashashibi, there must have been a ceremony, and Nashashibi gave him, as a souvenir, he gave him this album, which has all sorts of photos. In those days, black and white is what you would have expected. Photos of events that that Herbert Samuel would be interested in remembering. For instance, here you have the opening of King George's Avenue. A friend of mine, when Kate Middleton, whatever her name is, she gave birth to somebody and they called him George. Who will be King George someday? Someday. So a friend of mine said, here in Jerusalem we have such far planning that we already have a King George. Okay, so maybe a century in advance. So that's this, and all sorts of. We have to say this is the old city. This is the Jewish quarter. There are Jewish events. There are Muslim events. He's the mayor of the whole city. What happened with this album after it was given to Herbert Samuel? Herbert Samuel gave it to an aide and said, put it somewhere. How do I know? Because had Herbert Samuel taken it home with him back to London, it wouldn't be here. But it was given to an aide. The aide put it in a box or left it on a shelf. And someday, 20-some years later, the Israel State Archive inherited it. As far as I know, by the way, Herbert Samuel's grandchildren and great-grandchildren live in Israel. So I've been told. Never met them, but I've been told. Next one. We're still not in the state of Israel. These are the letters of Rachel. Rachel, our most the famous poet of Israel. She wrote, okay, if you don't know, you don't know, but Rachel is a very famous poet. And she died in 1931. So how do we have her document in this Israel State Archive? She was very friendly with she was a very tragic figure, a very important poet. And she had a friend who she called Shu. And Shu was Shulamit Klugai. And Shulamit Klugai was the sister of Rachel Yenait. And Rachel Yenait was married to Yitzhak ben Tzvi. And Yitzhak ben Tzvi is Israel's second president. And Rachel Yenait was an important figure of her own, which means that after Rachel died in 1931, Shulamit Klugai still had the collection of letters from Rachel, and Rachel was important. And then when Shulamit Klugai passed away, many years later, her sister inherited the pile. And then some years later, when her sister was transferring her late husband's documents to the State Archive, so there's a lot of interesting stuff about the Aleppo Code and all sorts of other stuff in there. But there's also letters from Rachel. Who would have guessed? Here they are in the State Archive.
Okay.
We're getting closer, but we're still not in the state of Israel. This is still British material. These are, as it says, application for an order of deportation by the Palestine police force. These are Jews who reached mandatory Palestine illegally, according to British laws, before World War II. And as you see, each one of them is photographed with a it's a mugshot with a number. And they filled out a form of who they were and where they came from and who their family was and so on and so forth. And they were supposed to be deported back to Europe. And in this particular case of this file, it was June 39 by the time they were being rounded up. And as far as we know, they were never deported because September came along and they were still here, and so they were never deported. Had they been deported, these would be the forms of Holocaust victims. As it is, they're probably the forms of people who stayed here and have children and grandchildren.
For how many years do you have these?
We have quite a bit of this stuff from the 1930s. Quite a bit of it. Once World War II is on, nobody's deporting anybody anywhere or anyway.
So from the time of the white paper or even earlier?
Most of this is slightly before the white paper.
Okay.
But the British already didn't they were crimping.
Do you also have illegal Arabs are in there?
We have a collection of, there's something here which I'm missing. Okay. We have a collection here of files of people who were already here legally and who wanted Palestinian citizenship, British Palestinian citizenship.
Right.
And so there are I think thousands of those files. Many of them are Jews, some of them are not Jews. Some of them are Arabs who also wanted to acquire Palestinian citizenship. Okay, this is two documents. You can have a problem with it because it's shiny.
Yeah, okay.
This is two documents. This one is the scorecard of the vote at the UN in November 1947 to partition Palestine. And you can see it's a standard form with the names of all the countries, and there are 3 columns, yes, no, and abstain. In the case of Siam, which is Thailand, they didn't even abstain, they were simply absent.
Right.
And somebody was keeping score as they went through that, that event we all heard on the radio. Afghanistan, or what is it? Starts with Afghanistan, no. Argentina, abstain. Australia, yes. You've heard the recording.
Yeah.
So somebody filled it out. And at the bottom they wrote that there were 33 for and 10 against and 1 abstain. 10 abstain. 13 against, 10 absent. No, forget it. Okay. 33, 13, 10, and 1.
Okay.
So that's one document. And then somebody who was present, there must have been dozens of copies of this, because it was anybody who was there.
Right.
So as somebody picked up one of these and then took it and put it into a cardboard second document and went around signing people. So you have David Ben-Gurion and Abigail Silver and Moshe Sharet and Golda Meirson, because it's before 1946, that's her name, Eliezer Kaplan, Chaim Weizmann, Harry Truman. Okay? So that's this document. It's more of a museum piece than a document, but it's interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah, wow.
Okay. There is one, which is, I got it over here, I don't know.
Okay.
This is the only time since the destruction of the temple when all of the Israeli newspapers got together and they had one unified edition, and that's the day of the creation of the State of Israel. And it's called Yom HaMedina. It's not called Haaretz, it's not called Ma'ariv, it's called Yom HaMedina. Uton Mishutav Shel Bnei Israel, so they all got together, and it's Friday, the 14th of May. And it's interesting, the formulation, Ha'am Machriz al Medinat Yisrael. Not Ben Gurion is declaring, the people is declaring the State of Israel. Picture of Herzl, that's inevitable. Look how small our government was in those days. Here's the entire government except for Golda Meir, who was in the States trying to raise money. But it's a very small government. We don't do that anymore. Oh, I missed. This one should have been over here.
Okay.
Between the decision to partition and the declaration of the state, in December 1947, a man who you've never heard of called Bet Tzadi Michaeli, who probably means Ben Zion Michaeli, who is Nasi HaMoatza HaMekumit. He's the president of the local committee of Herzliya. And he writes a letter in December 47, so it's 2 weeks after the decision. And he writes a letter to the Jewish Agency, which is the acting government of it. And he says, well, guys, we're going to have the state, that's great. And we, of course, all hope that Jerusalem will be the capital, because Jerusalem has to be the capital. Everybody understands Jerusalem has to be the capital. But the partition plan said Jerusalem wasn't going to be the capital. And so he says, but if by any chance Jerusalem isn't the capital, how about Herzliya? And he says it's near Tel Aviv, but it's not in Tel Aviv, and there's good parking, and it's green, and it happens to have the name of Herzl. Right? So nothing ever came of that, but it's a cute idea. Public relations.
Hey, the United States had a whole bunch of capitals before Washington.
Yes. Okay, here's an interesting story. This one document is Israeli, and the other document actually is an American document. It's Ben Gurion declares the State of Israel 4 p.m. in Tel Aviv. That's probably 10 in the morning or 9 in the morning in Washington. There have been negotiations for weeks surrounding Truman. Will he or won't he recognize the State of Israel? The State Department is furiously against, but eventually it's clear that Truman is going to recognize the Jewish state. So that morning, the top Israeli, well, up until 5 minutes ago, wasn't an Israeli at all. The top Israeli in Washington, a man by the name of Eliyahu Epstein, calls Clark Clifford in the White House and he says, we have a state and you're going to recognize, right? So Clifford says to him, well, the president may indeed recognize you, but the president of the United States can't just recognize you because he heard on the news that you say you're there. He needs a document. He needs an invoice. Right? So Epstein scratched his head. This is the day before they had iPhones, and he didn't, it wasn't that, the communication wasn't that, but he scratched his head, went back to his office, took a plain sheet of paper, and he wrote on it that, dear Mr. President, I have the honor to notify you the State of Israel has been formed, and it's effective as of midnight Israel time, and we request your recognition. So now there's an invoice. If there's an invoice, that's fine. Now Harry Truman can sign. And he signed a short letter which had been prepared beforehand, and it says this government has been informed that a Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and a recognition has been requested by the provisional government, because that's what it says here, provisional government. Okay? The United States recognized the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new State of Israel, crossed out. It said before, the new Jewish state. Now, we understand why that happened, because up until the moment they got Epstein's letter, they didn't know it was going to be called the State of Israel, so they said the Jewish state. Sure. On the other hand, nowadays, there is, so I've been told, Abu Mazen and some of the other top Palestinians, this is an American document, it's on the internet. Right. They've been taking copies of this, and they have been pointing to the fact that even in May 1948, President Harry Truman was not willing to recognize the Jewish state, but rather the State of Israel. So they've turned the story on its head, and they're saying, you see, if Truman didn't, why would we? Right. So that's the story of this document. I don't know if you've ever had to do with legal types. In Israel, our bureaucracy is riddled with legal types. It's not riddled with, it's burdened with legal types. We can't get anything done because of the legal types. If I want to purchase a new table for Olga to work on, it'll have to go through the legal types. It'll go through 5 different procedures or 12. There'll be a file this thick just to procure a new table for her. That's the way it is nowadays. If you want to do something significant, this much paper or more. So here we have one sheet of paper on which in June 19 or late May 1948, the law of the IDF. This is the law promulgated in which, or the decree which enables the setting up of the IDF. This is the entire document. Ben Gurion, as the prime minister, is signed down below on 26th of May 1948, and he says what authority he has to do this, and he says there will be an army. We're going to call it. It'll have 3 branches: air, sea, and navy. In emergency conditions, we're allowed to mobilize people into it. It says something about the age. It says in number 4 there it is illegal to have any other military force in Israel, which is cool because this is just before Al Talena. He's already got it into one page. He's got that in there already. Yeah. And then he says, I have the authority to promulgate, these, that, and the other. And that's it. One piece of paper. That's the IDF is before me. Nowadays, you take a room this size, right. Fill it up with all of it. Okay. The war is over, and they have a public, I don't know what's the taharut of designing a new flag. There's a new state, a new flag. So there are all sorts of proposals come in. This one you can even see.
When you say public, you mean anybody in the public?
Anybody in the public could submit a proposal of how they thought the flag of the new state should look. This you can see some influence here, right? Some of the others, a lot of them have seven yellow stars because Herzl wrote about 7 yellow stars for 7 hours of work. And so, so there's a whole pile of these things. And the committee looked at all the proposals and all of the explanations. And then they said, the Zionist movement already has a perfectly good flag. Why don't we use it? Yeah. So this flag of the State of Israel is the flag of the Zionist movement, which has been around for 100 years by now. But there is this file which says all sorts of other ideas, of proposals of how it could look if we wanted it.
So that's funny. Just any amateur was just putting it together.
Some of it's pretty amateurish. And the committee that was supposed to choose thought they were all amateur. They didn't choose any of them. This should have been over there, but this is over. This is the first law or the first declaration of the provisional government. This is on the day of the declaration itself. And what they do is here they said the British laws that were in place until 5 minutes ago are still in place under our authority now. Okay, right. They basically simply, you can't pass a lot of new laws all at once. So basically, they said we now have the authority. The entire corpus that was here until just now is still in place. We'll enact new laws over time, with the exception, of course, of anything having to do with the white paper. That is immediately annulled. Okay, so that's the very first law passed. It's not even a law because it's not legislated. It is legislated. So that's the first law. Okay, here's a cute one. It is now December 1949, so the War of Independence is over, and the United Nations is still haggling about internationalizing Jerusalem. Now, the Israelis hold half of Jerusalem and the Jordanians hold half of Jerusalem, and neither of them has any intention of letting anybody else control what they control. But the United Nations is still yammering on what would that mean, having an international city of Jerusalem. And so the State of Israel has sent its foreign minister, Moshe Sharet, to New York to tell people to cut it out. And Ben Gurion at one point sent him a telegram. And it says, I'll read it in Hebrew first, it says, מכנס מחר בבוקר הממשלה, אציע לה הצהרה בכנסת שמדינת ישראל לא תשלים עם שום צורה של שלטון זר בירושלים היהודית וקריאתה מהמדינה, ואם נעמוד בפני ברירה של יציאה מירושלים או מהאום, נבקר לצאת מהאום. I will convene the government tomorrow and we will decide on we will formulate a decision whereby if anybody tries to disconnect Jerusalem from our sovereign state, and if we have to choose between Jerusalem or being in the United Nations, we will leave the United Nations. Short, concise, clear. These are our
And
priorities.
this is after they already were, before they were in the United Nations. So
This
it's,
is December 49.
December
No,
40. They were in the UN
United
at that
Nations.
point.
Yeah, they were in the
Okay.
United Nations already. And this it never happened. They never had to do that because
Right.
also the Jordanians weren't going to relinquish their part. of the
Sure,
Arabs.
sure. Yeah.
This is 1961. This is Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann is in jail in Israel, and he has a lot of spare time on his hand. And so he writes his version of history, and he's very meticulous about it. And every evening, he goes over it, and he erases, and he makes corrections, and he signs on the side. So this is Adolf Eichmann. And you can actually see, this is I have a better one, this one, which he also is part of the same document. Here's a visual depiction of his entire thesis. And how is it a visual depiction of his entire thesis? This is an organizational tree of the SS, only the SS. Okay, so Hitler is above. This is just the SS. And it says here, there's a level, and there's another level, and there's another level, and there's another level. And look at me, I'm way down at the bottom. Right?
Right.
So what do you want from me?
Yeah.
Now, of course, this is
Following orders.
This is following orders. Of course, this is nonsense on all sorts of levels, but it is factually true. There were these layers above him. There were also a lot of layers below him. He
Yes,
forgot to mention them, and he also indicates slightly here that the fact of the matter is that although he was way down here, he had access up here, which nobody else of his level had.
Yeah, the dotted line going.
Right. So, because although he was an insignificant lieutenant colonel, he was actually a very, very, very significant lieutenant colonel, even if he was only a lieutenant colonel. But that's his entire thesis in one visual depiction. Okay. So it's 1967, and this I don't want to take. This I don't want to. Sorry. No,
What's
no,
that?
don't. I don't want you to photograph.
Okay. I'll photograph you. Then okay, well,
Photograph me.
okay.
This, right after the 6 Day War, the government of Israel decides that it is going to annex Jerusalem. Everybody, I mean, I don't know everybody. There was a very broad consensus in Israel. But when you say annex, what are you going to annex? Annex is illegal, actually. You have to have a line that says this is the line. And so, for instance, the Jordanian half of Jerusalem was a tiny little sliver around the old city. And there was a committee of generals set up right after the war. The government said to them, go draw us a line. And the line should include as many empty hills as possible around Jerusalem and as few Arab villages as possible around Jerusalem. And then Teddy Kollek came and said, and I want an airport, and there happened to be an airport near closer to Ramallah than to Jerusalem, but it was there. And so they drew a line, which is the line of, basically it's the line of the wall these days. The line of the wall today hugs pretty close to that line. But this is the original map, which they worked on, and up until yesterday I would unfold this, but my staff here saw that I kept on using this. So Olga, whose job is to preserve old documents, just today she put this, 2 days ago it wasn't, she put this into this plastic casing so that now Yaacov won't destroy it every time he shows it to somebody. Okay? So that's this one. Almost at the end, but still a couple of, one or two interesting stories. Okay, short little documents. The letterhead is the Knesset, a member of Knesset. It doesn't say which member of Knesset. And whoever the member was, he hand wrote that this was is early July 1974. And what it says is, Israel, a number of minutes ago, I was called by a man by the name of Eliezer ben Aryeh, who told me that he has a group of 75 families who wish to settle in Ma'ale Edomim, underlined, yes, Ma'ale Edomim. I suggested to him that he should call your office in order to present their case to you. I hope that you will be able to help. You will be able to help them. Signed, Arik. Okay, who's Arik and who's Israel? Arik clearly is Arik Sharon. There's no doubt about that. And Israel Galili, if you know what was going on, is also, there's no doubt about him, but most people don't know him, which is interesting. Because for many years, Israel Galili was the second most powerful man in the Labour Party. Sometimes Levi Eshkol was above him, sometimes Golda Meir was above him, sometimes Yitzhak Rabin above him, but he was always number two. He never ran a ministry. He always was a minister without portfolio because he wanted to have time to make certain that he could make certain that that he would support the prime minister, which is a nice way for saying that he could control the prime minister. Although I don't. But he was a very, very powerful man. Even though nowadays I've showed this to any number of people, and most people don't even recognize his name anymore. Israelis my age, they don't remember him. Very, very powerful man. So, as far as we know, this is the earliest document in the story of Ma'ale Adumim. In other words, after this, it began happening. It was founded, I think, in 1979. This is 1974.
It was obviously named at this point, though.
Well, the place was a geographical place that's been known for a long time. But what I also find interesting here is, in July 1974, Arik Sharon is a member of Knesset of Likud, which is in the opposition. Israel Galili is a minister of labor. They're on first. The fact that they're on first name basis, well, it's a very small country, so they're on first. But that's not so surprising. But it's interesting that this guy comes to Sharon because he knows Sharon's the kind of guy who gets things done, and Sharon knows that if he sends a note to Israel Galili will get it done, right? Or at least set it into motion. So this is the beginning of Ma'ale Adumim. Another two, and we're finished.
Is that the first that's actually was a settlement?
That's the earliest. No, there were other settlements.
Okay.
Before. This is the earliest document that we've been able to find dealing with Ma'ale Adumim.
Okay.
This is the peace agreement with Egypt. Let's find the page. Here it is. Okay. Remember in 1979? Maybe you don't remember. Maybe you do. In 1979, the lawn of the White House. Menachem Begin, Anwar Sadat, and Jimmy Carter, big ceremony, and they signed a document in triplicate. Each one of them had 3 languages in it: Hebrew, Arabic, and English. English, in the case of argument, English is the one that would decide. There were 3 copies of it, and each one of them signed all 3. And the one that was signed by all 3 and given to Jimmy Carter, I assume, is in the National Archive in Washington, D.C. And the one that was signed by Begin, they're all signed by all 3, but the one that was given to Begin, he brought back, and here it is, in our archive. And the one that Anwar Sadat took back home on his, I assume, is in some Egyptian archive. They don't open their archives very much, so it's hard to get at it. But that's this document. It's thicker than the ones that we saw before, one-pagers. But anyways, so this is the piece. We only have 2 of these. This one, and there's one with Jordan, of course. So this is the most significant of the 2. And finally, final document is not really a document at all. It's an artifact. And this is Yigal Amir's pistol. Okay, this is the pistol. This is the pistol that killed Yitzhak Rabin. And the reason we have it here, normally we don't collect artifacts of the State Archive, but this is part of the document, the indictment, and the trial proceeding. That's of course an important document. And so the decision was made. In this case, the pistol itself would also be brought to the State Archive. So we have the pistol. And we have the bullets that were extracted from his body, and so on and so forth. And so that's this document. And that's the last document.